The hospital corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic and warm linen, a strange mix that clung to the air and made time feel suspended. Outside the maternity ward, families whispered, nurses moved briskly, and new lives quietly announced themselves with fragile cries behind closed doors. Inside one of the rooms, a young woman lay pale and exhausted, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the blanket around her newborn. She had barely slept, her body aching from labor, her heart racing with a mix of fear and wonder. This should have been a moment of peace. Instead, it became the stage for a confrontation she never imagined would happen so soon. Her mother-in-law stood near the door, arms crossed tightly over her chest, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. From the moment she entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. There was no congratulations, no smile, no gentle glance at the baby. Only judgment. Her eyes scanned the room as if looking for flaws, then fixed sharply on the young mother. Words followed quickly, sharp and unforgiving, cutting through the fragile calm like glass. She accused her daughter-in-law of being unprepared, of embarrassing the family, of not being strong enough to be a proper wife and mother. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. Nurses paused in the hallway, sensing tension but unsure whether to intervene. The young woman tried to speak, but her throat tightened. Tears burned behind her eyes, not from physical pain, but from humiliation and disbelief. She had just given birth, yet here she was, being told she didn't belong. Then came the words that broke her. The mother-in-law demanded that she leave the hospital as soon as possible. "You don't deserve to stay here," she said coldly, as if the room were hers to command. "You're not welcome. Don't make a scene." The baby stirred softly, sensing distress, and the young mother clutched the child closer, her heart pounding. For a moment, it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. As the mother-in-law turned toward the door, ready to summon hospital staff and force the issue, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Calm, steady, unmistakable. A sudden guest appeared at the doorway, drawing everyone's attention at once. Conversations in the hallway fell silent. Even the mother-in-law froze mid-motion, her confidence draining from her face. It was Demi Moore. She wasn't there for drama, not at first. Dressed simply, without the glamour the world associated with her, she had come to visit a friend recovering in the same ward. But the raised voices, the sharp tone, and the visible distress inside the room caught her attention. Demi paused, listening for only a second before stepping forward, her presence instantly commanding the space. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. The mother-in-law stammered, clearly unprepared. She tried to justify herself, framing the situation as family business, and implying the young woman was being overly sensitive. Demi's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. She looked at the young mother, then at the baby, then back at the older woman. "This is a maternity ward," Demi said evenly. "This woman has just given birth. This child has just entered the world. And you think this is the place for cruelty?" The room felt suddenly smaller. The mother-in-law tried to respond, but words failed her. Demi stepped closer, not aggressively, but with an authority that didn't need to be loud. "If you're looking for control, you're rushing to the wrong station," she continued. "This isn't about you." Those words hit hard. The mother-in-law's face drained of color. For the first time, she seemed aware of how she looked, not powerful, not respected, but exposed. Nurses quietly moved closer, reassured now that someone had spoken up. The young mother felt something she hadn't felt since the confrontation began: relief. Later that same day, the tension followed Demi beyond the hospital walls. She appeared on Today with Jenna and friends for a scheduled interview, meant to be light, reflective, and inspiring. But live television has a way of revealing the truth beneath the surface. When the hosts casually brought up the incident, framing it as a small disagreement, Demi's demeanor shifted. She straightened in her chair, her voice steady but unmistakably intense. "It wasn't small," she said. "And it wasn't a disagreement. It was cruelty directed at a woman at her most vulnerable moment." The studio fell quiet. Viewers could feel the shift through their screens. Demi spoke passionately about motherhood, about the way society too often turns away from women when they need protection the most. She challenged the idea that family status or age gives anyone the right to demean another person. At one point, a host tried to redirect the conversation, suggesting they move on to lighter topics. Demi shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "This matters. Silence is how this kind of behavior survives. The exchange grew heated. Tension crackled as Demi refused to soften her stance for the sake of comfort or ratings. She wasn't yelling, but her words carried weight, sharpened by conviction. Social media lit up within minutes, clips spreading rapidly as viewers praised her for speaking out. Others criticized her for being too intense. Demi didn't flinch. By the end of the segment, it was clear something significant had happened. The show returned to its usual rhythm, but the impact lingered. That night, messages poured in from women around the world, sharing similar stories, times they had been silenced, shamed, or pushed aside during moments when they needed support most. Back at the hospital, the young mother slept more peacefully than she had all day. The mother-in-law did not return. Nurses smiled gently when checking in, offering quiet reassurance. The baby breathed softly, unaware of the storm that had passed just hours earlier. Sometimes, change doesn't come from grand speeches or planned movements. Sometimes it comes from a single voice speaking up at the right moment, in the right place, refusing to let cruelty go unanswered. And sometimes, that voice belongs to someone unexpected, reminding everyone present that dignity is not negotiable, and compassion is not optional. The maternity ward was unusually quiet for that time of day, wrapped in a hush broken only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft murmurs of nurses moving from room to room. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting pale reflections across the polished floor. In one of the rooms near the end of the corridor, a young woman lay propped against white pillows, her body exhausted, her emotions raw. Cradled in her arms was her newborn child, tiny fingers curled instinctively around her own. This was meant to be a moment of healing and joy, yet tension hung in the air like an approaching storm. Her mother-in-law stood near the foot of the bed, her posture rigid, eyes cold and assessing. There was no warmth in her gaze as she looked at the baby, no softness in her voice as she spoke. Instead, her words came out clipped and harsh, filled with accusation and disappointment. She criticized everything, the way the young mother held the child, the fact that she looked weak after childbirth, even the hospital itself. Each comment chipped away at the fragile sense of safety the room was supposed to provide. The young woman tried to defend herself, but her voice trembled. She was still recovering, her body aching, her mind foggy from exhaustion and emotion. Every sentence from her mother-in-law felt heavier than the last, pressing down on her chest until it became hard to breathe. Nurses passing by slowed their steps, sensing something was wrong, but none entered. Family matters, they assumed, best left untouched. Then the mother-in-law crossed a line that silenced the room. She declared that the young woman should leave the hospital immediately, claiming she was a disgrace and an embarrassment. She spoke as though the decision was hers to make, as if the bed, the ward, and even the child belonged to her authority. The young mother's hands tightened around her baby as tears spilled freely now, her heart breaking under the weight of shame and disbelief. She had never felt so alone. Just as the argument reached its peak, the door opened. A woman stepped inside quietly, yet her presence was impossible to ignore. There was something grounded and unmistakably confident about her, something that made the tension shift instantly. It took a moment for recognition to register, but when it did, the effect was immediate. Demi Moore stood in the doorway, having been drawn in by the raised voices while visiting someone else in the ward. She didn't rush to speak. Instead, she observed the trembling mother, the sleeping newborn, the domineering figure at the foot of the bed. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was calm, almost gentle, but firm enough to command attention. She asked what was happening, not as a celebrity, but as a woman witnessing another woman in distress. The mother-in-law tried to explain, her tone suddenly uncertain. She framed her behavior as concern, as discipline, as tradition. Demi listened without interruption, her expression steady. When the explanation ended, Demi shook her head slightly. "This isn't concern," she said. "This is control." Her words landed like a verdict. She spoke about how childbirth leaves women vulnerable, how the days following birth can shape a mother's confidence for years to come. She reminded everyone in the room that no one has the right to humiliate another person in such a moment. Then she delivered the line that would later echo far beyond the hospital walls: "If you think power lives here, you're running to the wrong station." The mother-in-law stood frozen, unable to respond. For the first time, her authority collapsed. Nurses entered the room, reassured by Demi's presence, and gently suggested that the older woman step outside. She left without another word, her earlier confidence replaced by stunned silence. News of the incident traveled quickly, and by the time Demi appeared later that day on Today with Jenna and Friends, the tension followed her into the studio. What was supposed to be a friendly conversation took a serious turn when the hosts mentioned the hospital incident, attempting to keep the tone light. Demi's posture changed instantly. She leaned forward, eyes intense, voice unwavering. She spoke openly about what she had witnessed, refusing to reduce it to a family disagreement. She described the damage that emotional cruelty can cause, especially when directed at women during childbirth and recovery. When one of the hosts suggested the situation might have been misunderstood, Demi pushed back, her frustration finally visible. "This is exactly the problem," she said. "We excuse behavior like this because it makes us uncomfortable to confront it." The exchange grew heated. The studio atmosphere shifted as Demi challenged the tendency to protect harmful traditions under the label of family values. She emphasized the importance of standing up, even when it disrupts the moment. Viewers watching at home felt the rawness of the conversation, the refusal to smooth over hard truths. As the segment ended, it was clear Demi had said what she came to say, regardless of the consequences. Clips of the interview spread rapidly online, sparking debate and support in equal measure. Many praised her honesty and courage, while others criticized her for being too confrontational. Demi remained silent on social media, letting the conversation speak for itself. Back in the maternity ward, the young mother felt a shift she couldn't quite describe. Nurses were kinder, more attentive. The room felt lighter. She slept for the first time without fear of being judged or expelled. Her baby rested peacefully against her chest, safe and warm. The mother-in-law never returned that day. Whether she reflected or simply retreated, no one knew. What mattered was that a boundary had been drawn. The young woman was no longer alone in her vulnerability. Sometimes, it takes an unexpected voice to break a cycle of silence. Sometimes, it takes someone willing to risk discomfort to defend dignity. And sometimes, a single moment of intervention becomes a reminder that compassion, when spoken aloud, can change the course of a life just beginning.